So Canon's news swings from an $80,000 cinema zoom to firmware updates plus 2 creator focus cameras that are going to land very soon. So let's jump in. I'm Joseph Blake, professional photographer, videographer, and somehow still explaining why I need another tripod. So Canon just dropped a lens that sounds almost fake on paper. This is a single zoom that reaches from 40 millimeters, which is wide standard, all the way out to 1200 millimeters, which is super telephoto. Canon has now officially announced the Cine-Servo 40 to 1200 millimeter T5 to 10.8. And the headline feature is that the 40 to 1200 millimeter range with the built-in 1.4 extender, that pushes it long enough to 1800 millimeters. Now, in practical terms, this is the kind of lens that you see at live events, broadcast work, high-end field production, where you can't swap lenses, but you need tight shots and you need far away wide shots. Like, you need it all. The other big shift here is coverage. This version supports full-frame sensors, which is a meaningful change from Canon's current cinema EOS direction. Older generations of this concept leaned into Super 35 as the default format. But here, Canon is clearly treating full-frame as the expectation for a lot of high-end work going forward. Now, let's talk about what you can actually get physically, because this class of lens lives or dies on usability. Canon says that the PL mount version will come in at just under 15 pounds and about 16 inches long. That's a serious piece of glass. But it's also not in the needs its own cart category. Canon also says that the zoom, the focus, and the iris ring positions match its predecessor, which means that existing rigs and muscle memory should carry over. So if you've worked with Canon's earlier long Cine-Servo zooms, this shouldn't be a crazy update. Now, on the exposure side of things, this lens is rated for T5 on the wide and ramps up to T10.8 on the long end. That ramping behavior is normal for extreme range zooms like this. It's just part of why lenses often live in controlled production environments like this, where lighting and camera settings can adapt shot to shot. Canon has also leaned into modern production workflows. The drive unit supports fast servo performance when you use USB-C with USB-C power delivery. Canon also includes focus breathing compensation as part of the feature set. On the metadata side, VFX and virtual production pipelines, Canon says that the PL version actually is going to support Zeiss Extend data and Cook-I technology. So if you go RF mount instead of PL though, Canon positions that as tighter integration with some of its EOS cinema bodies. Shocker. Canon calls out support for dual pixel CMOS autofocus 2, the focus guide, and it specifically mentions auto exposure ramping compensation when paired with the C400. Pricing is exactly where you'd expect for something like this, but it still kind of lands crazy when you actually hear it. It's $80,000. This is an $80,000 lens. And they also offer an SS41 servo bundle for another $3,000. Mount options are straightforward though. Again, Canon's going to be shipping it with the REPL or the Canon RF mount. There's not an EF mount adapter or option at this time. So if you're thinking that this sounds like a 2026 purchase decision, that's going to line up with availability, as Canon is listing this as available in September. Now, this is not a lens for most people, right? Especially most people watching this channel. But it's a clear signal where Canon thinks high-end production is going to be headed, especially with full-frame coverage and RF support sitting right alongside the PL support. Now, I get a lot of questions about gear, so I do keep a full gear list down below. It covers all the cameras, lenses, audio, and accessories that I actually use both here in the studio and out as a professional photographer and videographer. It's not just a wish list, but those are affiliate links. So the channel does get a small commission at no extra cost to you if you purchase anything. So if you're curious what I'm shooting with, or you want to dig into my setup, that is the easiest place to find everything in one spot. But next, let's talk about a firmware update that's going to hit a little bit wider. All right, so Canon has updates that are coming that could change how your current camera behaves, and you don't have to spend any money, especially not $80,000 on a new lens. And this is actually covering multiple bodies at once. So Canon is announcing new firmware updates for the EOS R5C, the C50, the C70, the C80, and the C400, with feature upgrades spread across multiple cinema shooting, live production, and remote workflows. The big picture here is that Canon is adding features to older bodies like the R5C while still pushing newer cameras forward at the same time. The most concrete upgrade here that's called out is on the C400. Canon's going to add auto exposure ramping compensation, hey, we just talked about that, to counter iris ramping during zooms, like if you have a T5 to T10.8 super zoom. So if you've ever watched exposure dip as you zoom through a servo lens range, you already know that this feature is going to aim to smooth that out. The goal is more consistent brightness throughout the zoom, where light loss would normally show up. Now, remote production is also getting a real boost on specific models. Canon is adding USB control protocol over the C400, the C80, and the C50. Canon says that that's going to enable remote operation for record, start, stop, iris control, shutter settings, ISO adjustments, and focus control. For studio setups or multiple cams where operators are going to sit off camera or off stage, that kind of connectivity can change how small teams can actually cover larger jobs. Canon's also targeting streaming reliability with SRT improvements. The update adds auto reconnection if your stream signal drops momentarily. That doesn't solve every network problem in the world, but it's going to address some of the most frustrating failure points when you're doing live streaming, when a brief hiccup can actually force a manual intervention. There's also small usability updates that can still save time on set. Select models are getting a new level display that changes color when the camera sits perfectly level. So if you bounce between gimbals and tripods all day, or if you're building fast on location without time to second guess your horizon line, that visual confirmation can definitely help. As far as timing is concerned, Canon is giving a wide window here. The company says that these firmware releases will arrive sometime between June and September. That's a lot of time to roll out a firmware update. If you shoot any of these bodies, this looks like one of those updates that you're definitely going to want to put on the calendar once the release dates lock in per model. Next, here's one thing worth watching if you want APS-C speed without giving up pro level responsiveness. We've been talking a lot about the R7 Mark II and what it's going to borrow from those higher end top tier bodies like the R1 and the R5 Mark II. I've talked a lot about the Digic X processor and the Digic Accelerator, and the fact that the Digic Accelerator basically makes everything possible inside the R5 II and the R1, especially when it comes to both video features and autofocus, which are things that we're hearing are going to be big in the R7 Mark II. And so not a surprise, the R7 is going to be borrowing some things from those cameras. Camera Rumors is reporting, and this is an anonymous tip, but it sounds pretty plausible, that a Digic Accelerator Lite is going to be coming to the R7 Mark II, which suggests that Canon would bring some form of its newer dual processor approach down to its APS-C line. Now, this isn't confirmed product information, but it fits how Canon has been separating performance tiers, especially when you look at the top of the APS-C line with the R7 series, the 7 series, and the fact that it traditionally borrows as much as it can from the top of the line. We already know pretty clearly what the Digic Accelerator does in the Canon lineup because it shows up in cameras like the R1 and the R5 Mark II. And you can compare those cameras to the R6 Mark III or the R3 and really see where that chip can make a difference. Because in those cameras, the Digic Accelerator increases not only how much data the camera can push through its pipeline, but also some of the features that it's able to handle. But things like readout speed improvements, autofocus performance, offloading some of the heat generation on a body like the R5 Mark II does a lot to help that camera. The sensor discussion also on the R7 Mark II is tied directly to whether or not an accelerator style chip makes sense in a camera like that, as the discussion has indicated that the R7 Mark II might actually be getting Canon's first APS-C style sensor that is backside illuminated and stacked. And if that happens, then faster readout is going to put more pressure on processing across autofocus and high-speed capture features. Now, a light concept also lines up with how Canon already handles processor variations inside its product families. So even when cameras share similar branding around the Digic X naming, they don't always perform identically across the line. So if Canon wants an APS-C body that feels fast without stepping on flagship positioning through price or the full format advantages, then a scaled version of an accelerator approach sounds plausible from an engineering standpoint. On timing expectations, the same source is suggesting that we might not have to wait long to learn about this either way. The window mentioned is 6 to 8 weeks for additional information to surface, and we were expecting potentially at least a notice of development or product release, but maybe not necessarily availability. So if any of this turns into confirmed specs, it could set up the R7 Mark II as a very different kind of APS-C camera than its predecessor, which I think was, kind of a bummer. But that's just me. Let me know down in the comments. And if you want to see how I work outside the studio, outside of here in the real world, with real shoots, real light, and the decisions that I make in the field. I share that work on Instagram. You'll find behind the scenes clips, finished shots, quick breakdowns that don't always make it into my longer videos, and it's the most current look at what I'm shooting and how I'm working day to day. And of course, I've got a link down in the description. All right, final story before we go, because this one is gonna be big and imminent for creators who want full frame video tools without stepping into EOS cinema style pricing. Canon Rumors is reporting that there's going to be a new full frame V-Series camera expected soon, potentially next week, potentially at NAB. Positioned closer to something like an R6V or an R8V rather than anything super high-end. The model name itself actually doesn't sound locked in yet based on what's out there right now, so treat any exact naming as tentative until Canon puts it on a box. The reported direction sounds very creative first on how it's going to be prioritizing video features over traditional stills camera ergonomics. The camera reportedly is using a BSI CMOS sensor rather than a stacked design. It's also reportedly including vents for heat management, but does not include active cooling at this particular price point. The other design cue reinforces that it's going to sit inside the V-Series approach instead of their more traditional hybrid, DSLR style bodies. The camera reportedly is going to record 12-bit RAW video internally, which means we're going to get CF Express in some form described as 12-bit RAW, but it's reportedly going to skip an EVF entirely, kind of like the C50. Also reporting upgrades to the rear screen, which would be great, considering the fact that Nikon is eating everyone's lunch. And the current resolution on the R50V is a 1.6 million dot LCD. Brr, brr. There's also mention of an improved photo capability in this camera compared to the R50V. That detail is pretty vague right now since there's no numbers attached yet. But we already have the R6 Mark III in a cinema camera, right? That's the 50. So I'm kind of curious what this is going to be, and I'm thinking it might be something like the R8. But alongside that rumor is another rumor, a lens rumor, that says that we might be getting a kit lens pairing. So Canon may announce a 20 to 50 millimeter f4 IS STM PZ zoom. We talked about this in a previous video that we knew that this was going to be coming. And a power zoom makes sense for creators who want smooth focal length changes during takes without jumping into cinema zoom pricing or adding a ton of external motors to their cameras. Now, if this lands next week at NAB, where I will be, it's going to fill a pretty obvious gap between the entry-level creator bodies like the R50V, like the R8, or like an R7 that's video focused, and the higher priced hybrids like the C50 or the R5 Mark II or the R5C that in some cases still feel like they cater pretty heavily to photographers first. Now, if you want me to cover the announcement as soon as it breaks, let me know what you want to hear about down in the comments. Go ahead and hit subscribe and like and all that. Like I said, I will be at NAB. I live in Las Vegas. If you're going to be at NAB, let me know down in the comments. I would love to meet with anybody who is a subscriber to the channel. But that's it for today. Now, if you want to support what I'm doing here, I've got memberships, super chats, and gifts available. All my links are down below. Follow me everywhere that I am, including down there are links to all the gear that I use, both in the studio and everywhere else. Those links do help the channel. But as always, the easiest way to support what I'm doing here is to hit like, subscribe, comment, and share. Those are always free, and they go a long way to help me grow here and everywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.